We're ready to start.
It's just
Everybody else is ready.
so it's not like, you know, massive. Okay. Duck page. You know, we think of.
The goal of today's meeting is
Yeah.
basically to review the design development phase documents. We have one set of drawings that we're going to leave with you. Obviously, we don't have time to go through this with you in detail, and you don't probably have the stomach for going through it in detail during a meeting, but you'll be able to look through the detail of this. A lot of this is just a little more detail of what we've done to date, so you've seen this. There are some new sheets in here. We have mechanical and electrical drawings included in here now, and we'll go through some of the things that are different. We also have an outline specification that starts to identify all the different components and the divisions of the work that are done. We'll probably take us through that, explain that a little bit. We have some acoustical wall panel specification pages that Ray will explain when he gets here. And we have an update, a detailed cost estimate update for construction costs, site costs, and also the soft costs, the things that you don't see on bid day. Some of those things you're invested in already, like the asbestos abatement, for example, are listed in the soft costs. So, to start, maybe the thing to do before Ray gets here is talk through the outline spec.
Sure.
Do you want to go through that, how what's included?
Sure.
You have a copy of that.
The outline spec is really the way that we start organizing some of the materials and finishes and products. And we don't get too detailed in the outline. The specifications that we give the contractor are the detailed version. And the specs will define the quality that we're looking for. The drawings will do the quality and or quantity and location. So if you want to see what kind of wall panels we're looking for to put on the project, it'll be in the specifications. So what we're going to do, and this is a fluid document that we keep all the way through the project, we'll give you cut sheets on different parts and pieces. We'll get feedback from you. For instance, if we're looking at acoustical wall panels, we'll say, are you looking for the fabric? Are you looking for this other type of material? Here's what we would recommend, and here's our price point built into the budget. So you know right up front most of the products you're going to get. We'll have products in here like the shingles, the sheet metal, the stone, the brick that we're looking at. And we just try and track all these things because they all need to go in the specs anyway. But there are some that you may want to take a look at. For instance, we typically do white toilets, but if you prefer pink, you know, we'll change it. But some of these things, we lay them out so that you know right up front, and if we can, we'll actually start picking colors and different things like that, accessories to go with it. So some of the things you might see, like on the Division 0, that's all administrative stuff. We'll be tracking all that and how we want to run through shop drawings with the contractor and pay apps and progress needs. So it's all administrative pieces. And then we usually include a section where it talks about the different things that happen that are related to the work, like the asbestos abatement. We give them that information, we give them the survey, we give them the geotech report, other pieces of information that are relevant so that they know what's going on but aren't necessarily under their scope. And then we go through a portion for demolition. We'll have a package that identifies what's to be recycled and what gets demolished, and it will be coordinated with the drawings that show the areas of demolition. And then we go into the parts and pieces. The divisions that you'll see in here are concrete, steel, masonry, wood. And in concrete, it's pretty self-explanatory. We'll tell them what kind of concrete we're looking for and the different densities and strengths. When we get to the brick, we've told them what we're looking at for the brick on the precast, and we tell them what the precast is going to be. So we start tracking all of this, and if there's anything that you would like us to add to it right off the bat, you just let me know. It might be we just don't have it on the list yet. As we start developing details, we take the information we're putting in the detail and add it to the spec. So at the next construction document approval meeting, we'll give you a full set of specifications. It's probably going to be about twice this thick. You can read through it at your leisure for that too. But we'll try and hit the hot points for you ahead of time and get feedback.
I see there are a few things in here that are questions. Mostly it's just generic information about the column mats for the exterior columns versus cast stone. So some of those things we're still evaluating. So we do price evaluations. And some of that is built into our cost estimate that Stecker Hansen, Stecker Hansen has developed for us. So that's the outline of the manual. The drawings then, there are quite a few sheets here. There's the general information. There's a key code plan, which is the very next sheet. This is the title, of course. The engineering and architectural seals will either be on this sheet or the next sheet. There's a general notes sheet, abbreviations. Because we like to speak in different languages, so we get all these abbreviations. We don't want to write all the words out. Most of the contractors are pretty familiar with what those abbreviations mean. And then there's the civil sheets. There's the site survey, which was done by Yagi Colby, the demolition and site preparation, and the site improvement sheets. They will have some detail sheets when we get to the end of the construction and bid documents as well that will go with this. But basically, that's your site survey. It locates everything, shows where the utilities are at, and the grades, trees, things like that. This one actually adds the utilities and starts to show the demolition. The things with the X's on them are the trees that will be coming out. So those are clearly identified, and the trees that remain, there are notes that will talk about protection of those. And then this little sheet is the new construction sheet that shows that site drive and all the detail of the new roadway and the curb, and the Veterans Memorial will all be built into the sheet. And there'll be details on those. There'll probably be 2 sheets of details, I would guess, maybe 3. Then the next series of sheets are the architectural sheets. The floor plans, the room finish schedule, every room we call out what's in the floor, the walls, the ceiling, the base, with ceramic tile or carpet. Then there's enlarged plans for the courts. There are millwork drawings, because there's a lot of millwork in the courtrooms. The magistrate courtroom as well. Roof plans, then a door schedule, shows size, type of hardware, material. And then the building exterior elevations and sections. Then we've got enlarged plans for stairs and elevator, because there's more detail and there's a lot of lines on those, so we blow those up. Some interior elevations, ceiling plans, and then furniture layouts, showing the furniture in each of the rooms. Then this next series is structural drawings. Basically, again, starts with general notes, the foundation, some detailing, framing, Greg.
And one of the
Should I
things,
describe that one?
Yeah.
These are,
one of the things you're gonna see on the drawings is, we'll have the overall plans, but to be able to show more detail, we'll take a portion of it and enlarge it so we can show even more detail and dimensions. So as we get farther into the documentation phase, you'll start seeing more enlarged details, dealing with flashings and wall conditions and things like that. So it just adds more detail with every layer.
So then, these are basically all engineering series sheets, starting with structural, fire protection, plumbing, HVAC, mechanical, and then electrical. And Jake Cunliffe is here, he's the mechanical engineer, and James Dees is the electrical engineer. So they can respond to any questions or concerns you might have related to those. And of course, Ray is, as you know, focused on the courts aspect of things. So my question would be, how much of this detail do you want to look at? Do you just want to look at a few of the sheets that are different from what you've seen? We could go right to the court's millwork stuff. The floor plans are pretty similar to what you have been looking at. There's just a lot more notes on them, and we're not going to go through those ad nauseum today. But we will leave this information for you. I think it would be valuable to look at the courts because there's so much more detail there. This is the roof finish schedule. We haven't started to fill that in yet, but very soon we'll be getting into those interiors. This is the start of the for us, any interior elevations? Why don't we spin these around? It's kind of hard for
We can read
our
upside down.
courts folks to see it. I would have much more interest in it.
Let's see, there's an enlarged plan of the courts there too.
A 1.8 is the magistrate,
Yes.
and then A 1.5 is the courtroom, so.
Well-
It's this sheet right here.
Yeah, that's the sheet.
Yeah.
And to be honest, we're gonna have a meeting after this meeting, where we're gonna get into the lectern and the evidence presentation card, and just how we're gonna present evidence in the rooms. Apparently, by the state law, or is it just a practice?
Yeah,
They
I don't know if it's practice or court rule, but I was telling Ray that in Iowa, lawyers, with the exception of jury selection, opening, and closing, ask questions from the counsel tables as opposed to from the lectern. So it kind of decreases the need, for a substantial lectern.
In fact, the lectern isn't even there for
No,
most of
we
it.
usually have just movable little podiums that we bring in for
And so that's
opening
gonna,
and closing, jury selection.
and that probably isn't gonna change in the near future.
No.
So we can eliminate the lectern?
We can possibly eliminate the lectern and then rethink the evidence card, because all we're gonna need is an Elmo.
That would be great. That would be a savings.
And,
Elmo,
What?
a place for a laptop,
Right.
potentially.
right, I don't, but have we, you weren't at the last meeting, but we conferenced you in.
Right.
Basically, it's just, there's gonna be acoustical on this wall, acoustical, fabric covered acoustical panels on this wall, and then this is gonna be some type of a reflective fabric covered, panel. So it's gonna reflect sound. And we're gonna probably have an acoustical engineer look at this real quick, like Kevin and I have to talk about that. But we did have Steve Caverstone on our team. The panel system, so these are the fabric covered panels. This is just a veneer wood system that's been set up. I don't know, I think we had this we had this pretty well developed last time. But the ceiling is dropped back over the public, so it kind of emphasizes the well area. And it's gonna be treated a little simpler back here in terms of there's not gonna be the wood paneling, it's just gonna be acoustical panels back in the back area. And then over the well, there is a bump ceiling area with a light bulb. So it's gonna kind of emphasize that well.
Okay.
And that's the district courtroom. And then this is a blow up of the district courtroom with all the dimensions. And it is, I think we have really good sight lines in here. And if you think there's a need, we could mock this up with cardboard or something, and you could check sight lines at some point in time. Or even when you bid it, you could put it in the bid documents that the contractors to mock it up within the space prior to, or during the working drawing, or during shop drawings, so that we can modify shop drawings if needed. We got your seal in there.
Okay.
And let's see, I'm not sure if there is a little, 2 shelves here for the clerk to put papers or files as needed. There's not any storage in this room for evidence, so you don't leave it in here overnight anyway. There's gonna be shelves here for the judge, in case he wants to have books.
Code of Iowa or something.
Yeah. And at this point, there's a drop-down screen right here and a projector. We're gonna have to detail into that wall and make sure acoustically we're not compromising the wall between the courtroom and the jury. Other than that, I think
As you
If
can
we're
see,
doing, if we're dropping something, we might be able
Yeah.
to build it in
But-
there.
But I think what you're gonna say is we're still showing more and more detail as we go.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
We started with the elevations and the 1/4 inch, we go to 1/2 inch, and we go to sections. And the next step is gonna be to call out all the materials. We're putting bulletproof material around the bench.
How about in front of the witness?
No. Unless you want it. Has that been done in the past? Really? Okay. Okay, then we'll make a note of that, because so we'll carry it around
Right.
like this then. Okay?
Okay.
But we're gonna, right now, we've got continuous, and I think we had the cut sheets last time. There's a continuous low voltage raceway, so you can put as many plugs as you want there, and it's gonna be easy to pull wire and change it out. And then a continuous power at every one of these workstations. So you get continuous here, here, here. I don't think there's a need for anything back in this area, other than we may incorporate speakers into that for sound masking, if we don't put those in the ceiling.
White noise?
White noise.
Now, this is what the meeting after this is gonna be dealing with, is the telecommunications and some of the
Yeah.
requirements.
So I think we can save a lot of that for the later meeting.
Yeah, we're gonna be getting into a lot of detail. Here, these are the bench configurations, and there's only really 1, 2, 3, 4 benches that we're gonna, sizes that we're gonna be getting. And instead of a gate, I'm showing this, we can talk about that later too. So that way, people could just unhook it and walk into the well. I did start looking at the lectern, and this was a electric lens, so you just push the button and it'll go to handicap, drop down to handicap level. The turning tables, we got the cable cubby here, which would be all your cables, including video. So you just pull it out and hook it in the back of the laptop. The cables would be there, all the attorney needs to bring in.
Audio out of the sound system.
Yeah, everything. And all they have to do is bring in their laptop and hook up. And there's a base to this, so that the floor box is below inside this cabinet, so you don't see any exposed wires. And from a security standpoint, this could be blocked if you need. This is the magistrate courtroom. Once again, the same vocabulary and aesthetic. And this kind of worked out pretty nice. It's just a perfect square here. And so you're gonna have the light go right. And this is probably not needed in this room. We'll talk about that
Probably
later.
not at all.
We may want to put a floor box in case you're in the future. Same ceiling heights, and we're up at 15 feet at the high point, which is pretty good. And then here's a blow up of that courtroom ramp, there's a ramp coming out for a witness. And basically the same type of detailing on the bench. This is gonna be totally accessible up here, so a person in a wheelchair could come out and maneuver. This one is accessible, the other one is not. I think that meets most of the requirements. I mean, typically, as long as one courtroom is accessible. And you want them both? I mean,
I'm not
that's-
sure. My concern is that the other one's a jury courtroom, and that's accessible.
Well,
It's
that's
not.
something to think about. That's something to think about.
This is a roof plan.
Yep.
Just very quickly, the door schedule sheet, a lot of the data's not in here yet, the sizes are here and the frame types. We'll get into that hardware from the CDs. These are those exterior elevations, in more detail with those. But generally they're the same as last time, haven't really changed anything. I think it'd be good to kind of explain some of the later sheets, the engineering sheets, a little bit. Unless there's anything else in the architecture that we want to look at. wall sections, flooring sections. We looked at all those last time. But what we didn't have, honestly, was all the engineering stuff.
What we did on the engineering, and I'll let these guys kind of kick in here, we tried to identify all the main runs, start looking at the big sizes, and the next layer we'll start picking up the smaller conduits and everything.
This is the structural engineer's data sheet, all of his charts, general notes. A lot of the stuff, specification stuff is actually on this sheet. So that's the structural engineer's general information sheet.
Special inspections and testing is gonna be required on this project, like it is on most. When we have steel and precast and concrete, there's certain testing that has to take place after the contractor gets installed to make sure he's compliant. And so we outline all those requirements right here. So there's not a question of what he has to do before he even is awarded the contract.
You don't know all the details into the bids. And then we get into the detailing. Foundations, walls, masonry, steel. And then the plans, for each of those. You can't see what we're piling one. The foundation plan.
One
Whether
thing we
floor
should,
framing.
one thing we should bring up, I think last time we talked about it, when the geotech came out and did their borings, they found that we have limestone down around 6.5 feet. Well, to get that out of the ground for the basement areas, it's gonna take a little more cost, and so we updated the estimate to include all that. But part of what we can do with some of that and with some of the other demolition is that we can crush it when they're on site and use it as the underlayment for the floor slabs as class 5 granular fill, which is what we require anyway. So you don't have to bring any new stuff in, and you don't have to haul the old stuff out because it can all be redone here, which is minor, like 2-3% waste. So we save some money by doing that. So that worked out really well.
After the structural, and there's floor framing, there's roof framing plans. And then we get into the fire protection. Now, these are just the zones. Jake, you want to talk about these?
Sure.
as well?
Yeah, basically the hatching represents the hazard area, and it's based on the space classification. So if it's a storage room, it's going to have a higher density of sprinkler head coverage just due to what's being put in that space. And so that's what this really represents. We'll add some detail to this, and we'll detail certain areas where we're concerned about how sprinkler heads are going to look in certain spaces. Generically in most spaces they'll have standard coverage, but as we get to the courtrooms and some of the key architectural details, we'll work with Don and Ray and Kevin and work out exactly what those details look like, and so we don't have any surprises where sprinkler heads are. And I foresee this probably, just due to the lack of detailed information compared to some of the other sheets, probably getting reduced, and as we talked about, maybe get this down onto less sheets than it's taken up now.
One of the things that we'll pay special attention to is in the inmate area, back at the interview rooms, where the inmates are coming up the elevator. Those require institutional heads, which are, I would hesitate to call them prison grade, but that's really what they are, so that they're
Not easy to break or
Tamper-proof.
cause a
can't knock
flood.
them off the walls and cause problems.
That'll probably be this area back in here.
Yep, that's salad corn, yep, that's correct. And so we'll put some sort of a designation for the type of heads in certain areas as well, which hasn't quite been detailed out, so.
One of the things that you should know about sprinkler companies is that they're required to be compliant with the code, and they have their engineering staff, they're required to put their stamp on it. So we give them all the parameters, the classification of the areas, and then they're required to put the heads where it's required by the code.
So their submittals, they'll be the only ones that submit drawings to us that have an engineer seal. Okay. And then we're into the plumbing drawings.
Yep, plumbing, we started just trying to figure out exactly where we would route piping. What generally that plumbing piping would consist of, and we started to label and call out fixture types. We're assembling cut sheets of those fixtures, so we'll get those to you for your review, so we can get everyone's buy-in on, what we're proposing to put in. And then this is just an initial pass. This will continue to get more and more detailed as we get valves and pipe sizes and everything finalized. So right now it's more about space coordination and how we're getting things to the individual spaces.
Part of what we look at with a 3-story building, when you count the basement as the third story, is how do you get pipes from one floor to the next? So part of what Jake and I went through and these different layouts is, what's the cleanest way to run the pipe? Not having to pass through spaces if we didn't have to, and keep it all organized so that we don't have conflicts with ducts and pipes and things like that. So we've kept it very clean, and we've kept, as it gets into the HVAC, we've kept a lot of the equipment out of the office environments where we could. And the noise has been pretty much relegated back to the mechanical room.
These are the sheets you can very quickly identify. If there was a sink you wanted and it's not shown, you'll know
It'll
it
pop
right
up
away.
because we have the plumbing fixtures.
Only fixtures are bolded.
Should
so
jump out
it's
at you.
Electric water coolers. Couple floors.
Starting to get an idea where the sanitary piping will go, and again, just kind of initial space planning and coordination. Nothing too exciting.
Most of it's above ceilings.
Yep, you won't see it, so. Again, staying out of the courtroom. You know, we may revisit this, just due to the amount of ductwork that we have in this area, and, you know, explore alternate routing, but
You can't go over. the
they're not very big.
Is that up in the attic space, or?
Yeah, we'll have to stay, out of that.
The one thing we talked about earlier is that these two toilets should be, it can't be a wall mount. It needs to be more of a residential type of
Okay.
quiet flush. Actually, I do this one that way too.
Yeah, quiet.
At least three, I think.
And that will include, there's hot water, cold water, vent piping, sanitary piping. We also have recirculation piping, so that the hot water will always be hot at the fixtures, so you don't have to wait for it, you know, to come up as standard. And then this is a description of the plumbing fixtures that we're planning on so far, but we'll get cut sheets of what these represent. These are the model numbers, descriptions. We'll get cut sheets so you can actually see what those look like, rather than just the descriptions.
Even the cooling.
Yep, and we went over this last time, but it's changed slightly. We're still playing with the location exactly of this unit and the transformer, and then we revised the well field to keep it, and I think we looked at that last time as well, kind of concise and simple rather than spreading it out, trying to avoid site conditions, so that hasn't changed much. And then this is the one that looks like a lot different. Now, Don and I were talking, and I think we're gonna add a zone here, but this is just a sketch showing proposed possible radiant floor zones, as we discussed at the last meeting, as an alternate to see what the price on that is, and
For the radiant heat in the floor.
Consider having
Asked
radiant.
about that.
radiant heating in the basement floors, if that's something that stays. So I sketched out what that might look like zoning wise, and we can talk about that further. You know, here we have ventilation ductwork, and so Don and I have been coordinating, working on where that's gonna go and what size, you know, what initial sizes it's gonna take to fit it above ceiling spaces.
I was waiting for her.
And then we have all the mechanical compressors for the majority of units are located in the mechanical rooms. So that's where the majority of the noise is gonna be. Out in the spaces, we have individual coils with small fans. Some of these units are mounted in the ceiling, so you'll see the face of the unit, and it's supply from the sides, return in the center, and a filter right on the face. So they're very simple to maintain, and they don't have ductwork or diffusers for us to worry about a contractor installing, so they go in pretty easily. Some of the larger spaces, or the spaces where we're more concerned about the aesthetics, have the architectural looking diffusers. They're a little bit less visible, and the units are concealed above the ceiling in those areas, so that would be a filter that you'd have to remove a ceiling tile to change a filter on. And so those, on this floor, that's here, and at this time, those are the ones that are above the ceiling. You know, in the vault, this is an exposed cassette unit, and I can provide cut sheets on these so everybody's familiar with what they look like, but
We're trying to
at this
keep
point,
them
we're trying to,
small and as efficient as possible. We've eliminated a lot of the ductwork because of these individual units. And all the piping goes back to the condensing
Yep.
units back here.
The piece that's not shown is each of these units will have two small 1/4 inch. The sizes vary based on the exact size of the units, but less than 1 inch pipes that go back to the refrigerant here. And,
I've got a question.
Yep.
After you finish there. This storage room, does there need to be specific or special humidification and dehumidification?
we've talked about possibly adding a dehumidifier specifically for this space,
Okay.
if that's something that we,
And then the other question is, should these be regular sprinkler heads or should they be like a dry system so they don't accidentally?
we can
go
talk
off?
about what's being stored there. We can talk about if there's concerns about what's being stored there, but typically,
I don't know, it's some public records being kept down here that have to be maintained, you know? Well, that's, I'm just throwing it out.
no, I think that's something that we should discuss.
Right now.
Typically, we don't get into a dry or a special system unless we're in a server room where there's significant investment, where a leaking pipe could cause catastrophic damage. If we have critical areas like that, it's something we can discuss, but it's certainly gonna add costs to look at a system like that, so, I guess I'll
Well,
lean on Don for
yeah.
how we wanna approach that, but.
First of all, what we talked about was that the whole building is conditioned, and because it has its individual areas provided by individual units, it can be conditioned to look tighter. Dehumidification or an extra system that, for archival storage and things like that, it is a more expensive system, and it would be isolated to just this area. But it isn't an extra cost, that we want to make sure you really want it to that degree. And we could probably pull out a system that describes what it does. For instance, if you were in the sheriff's office and he had an ammunition room and they have powder in there, you would have a special system to make sure that that stays at a particular humidity level, et cetera. I don't know if you need a special humidity level in this room, but we can certainly look at that. I guess we'll look to you guys for a little guidance on that.
What do you use now? So the damage that's done to the most, really old
What's that?
stuff.
Damage over
The
years.
damage has already been done to the really old stuff. I mean,
Perhaps.
it's been through it all.
Well, you didn't have any special dehumidification in the building, and so it's deteriorated, like you said already.
We will have dehumidification in general. We just won't have specific set point over individual spaces. So if something's critical, we can pay special attention to that.
Do you want to go back to the mechanical room briefly to look at that?
Okay.
One thing we should probably talk about is the mechanic room layout probably will change as we know what the size of the equipment we have, and the electrical room there
Some of this.
is probably gonna just go away completely. And we'll be able to rearrange, make sure that you've got plenty of room down there for the things that you want, and then laying out things a little more efficiently, taking the geothermal lines straight out the north wall instead of out and around.
Right now, they're coming up here, coming out to the field, and what he's looking at is potentially bringing them out this way.
Right.
So if we do that, Dave, this area right here where your workstation is, would probably move over to here. Electrical room might get a little smaller, maybe?
I think we just get rid of it. There's no reason to have a dedicated electrical room based on what equipment we're in
Is
with.
that right? Okay,
So-
good.
So we can get rid of
That's
a
just gonna
wall.
make things more efficient. Unless there's some reason you wanted to keep that secure, I don't really see the need. That room's already
Fire
gonna be
marshal's good
limited
with it.
access.
Well, you're already secured with it.
Yeah, it's not a fire marshal issue. Shouldn't be.
Unless there was more in there.
Well, yeah, right. We don't get to a level where it needs fire rating or special conditions.
Good news?
Coming up to the first floor, we have more of the above ceiling units than we did on the last floor. We have some larger spaces which are more conducive to, combining one unit with multiple diffusers. Still for the vault areas, we have the exposed unit. At the vestibule entries, we have either a ceiling mounted electric heat or a wall mounted electric heat, which we're still coordinating exactly how those will work with the wall structure.
The basic intent here, Jacob, if I can.
Yeah.
When you have a lot more people coming through, like on the main level, that's when we start looking at the bigger units.
Yep, the individual office spaces make sense for a single small unit. These start to make sense for a larger capacity. And then we're also just starting to route where the ventilation area is gonna come from that outdoor unit, and figure out how that's gonna route. So this, for example, this one unit will take care of the space conditioning here, and it'll recirculate and condition that air, heat or cool as needed. That outdoor unit out here just provides the ventilation air conditioned to that space. So it puts a little bit of fresh air in, takes a little bit of exhaust, old air out. And so that ventilation area is probably the biggest key part of coordination for us is where can all that ductwork go? You know, where are we coming up in chases up to the other floors? And so that's been our biggest coordination effort, aside from just figuring out where thermostats are gonna go and what,
See, that's the big
what
part of
zones
these
are gonna be.
guys. Each area gets to control their own.
Where's the thermostat?
Yes, yeah, you know, I mean, this office has a thermostat, this area has a thermostat, so that's all starting to get detailed out, and, you know, we'll be looking for feedback from everyone on how that works, so.
Okay. Reports for?
Yeah. All right, so perimeter zones here are still continuing to be that variable refrigerant system, which is just that coil and fan in each space, and they're very quiet. The courtrooms have a larger load, and they exceed the capacity of being able to be handled by one of these smaller units. Also, they have a varied load. Sometimes they'll be full, sometimes they won't. So a heat pump is more conducive to handling those zones. So these will actually have the compressors in these units. And so because of that, they're slightly more of a noise concern than these small units. And so what we've done is we've lined the ductwork and we've kept the ductwork out of the room as long as we can, provided more time for that sound to be attenuated and knocked down. We've also put duct silencers on, which are, you know, specially acoustically designed air pathways that help prevent the noise from transferring through the airstream, so we can get rid of any of that compressor noise or fan noise before we actually come out and get distributed air into the space. And then we're working with Ray and the architects on how we will work out these diffusers to be aesthetically pleasing and work with the courtroom ceilings, which are kind of a unique architectural feature. And so right now we're talking about a slot or a gap that would be around that light cove. You know, the dashed lines would be a return air path, the solid line would be a supply air path, and then above the ceiling what you're seeing is, you know, how all this ductwork routes and connects to those different air pathways. And then this is an open return which would pull from these dashed areas and go back to the unit. So again, we're still working on detailing it, but we have a pretty good idea of what we're making work. And right now these units are sitting on the floor in that janitor's closet just for maintenance and access. Because getting above the ceiling was proving to be a challenge for the access requirements of the units.
Not only that, but you don't have to go into the courtrooms or into the back area to get access to these units, so everything can be done from outside of the courtrooms. So if we're getting too technical, let us know. If it's not technical enough, we can dive into it a lot more. But we're trying to give you an overview of how we're going through and coordinating all the comfort levels here. So.
The final set of sheets are James
Mhm.
sheets, and these are electrical, and they're divided between power and lighting. So we probably won't get into the detail of all the outdoor locations today, or we've even got them all, but that's something that all of the staff are gonna wanna do. We
We'll have separate meetings with them.
We can have separate meetings, they can sit down and review these and say,
Yeah,
oh, can we mark this set up, and show we want those? And they can do that, if that's what they'd like to do.
We'll make sure that if they want 15 outlets, they get 15, or if they just want 2, you know,
They still get 10.
they still get 10.
Yeah, we'll make sure that we're not gonna have too few.
So
With
James,
air
you
on
wanna
the other side.
talk about-
Well, yeah, this is the site plan, it's similar to what Jake had, and we're showing the utilities, some new site lighting fixtures on the parking lot and the driveway in front. And then space for the utility transformer back here. This will be connections to the ventilation unit. Then connections from the courthouse back to the jail with power and communications lines. And then the next 3 drawings are basic general layouts for light fixtures, working with Don and the architects on the different ceiling types that we have. Generally speaking, we're gonna have 2x4 or 4 foot with 4 foot long T8 lamps. Energy efficient, yeah, but nicer looking than those. And ones that with the lamps all work.
More energy efficient lamps.
Yeah, definitely.
The other part of that is, as we do these layouts and pick out fixture types, it all ties back into the rebates that we might be able to achieve at the end. So we're trying to go
Yep.
through
Yep.
and identify all of those to get the most bang for your buck on those rebates.
You see some lighting on the outside of the building too.
Yeah, so we're lighting up that backyard, so it's not a place where people can hide, because it could be kind of dark and concealed back there with the trees and the fence to conceal the equipment and all that. And we don't want that to be a security concern. And then more lighting in the courtrooms. We haven't really detailed that all out yet. There's gonna be opportunities to do some nice stuff in there, potentially cove lighting, some nice pendants. And then, of course, the control of all that in relationship to any AV systems, turning lights down for when using projector maybe, that type of thing. And, you know, where those controls be, we could talk a little bit more about that maybe in the next meeting.
I think the only lights that would have to be turned off are the ones in front of the.
Probably, yeah.
Because we're gonna have to go with a projector that's gonna be,
Daily.
yeah.
Right, yeah, newer projectors are much better. And in general, we'll try to keep things simple so that there's not a million switches on the wall, and everybody's trying to figure out, oh, well, which ones do we flip and
Well,
which buttons to
that
push.
brings up another question, that you know, the court needs to decide. Do judges like to set the light levels, or do you just leave it?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, good question.
Well, do you have a lighting control package already developed yet?
No, it's still somewhat vague. I mean, I have it up here, but it's not documented, so.
Once we get some more feedback, we can put together a lighting control
Yeah,
package.
and I can provide a description of what the judges will be able to do or not do, depending on whatever you want.
And along with that, a lot of the offices and the way he set it up is occupancy sensors are in the rooms, offices, toilets, storage rooms, so that when there's nobody in there, the lights automatically go off, and when somebody enters, it comes back on.
Actually, we're changing that with the new code. We still call them occupancy sensors, but they're now really vacancy sensors.
Oh.
So you always have to push the button. I know.
They're out there.
But you know, an engineer.
I do.
And in the courtroom, there is a relatively, well, it's gonna cost more, but it's a Lutron system where it can be programmed, so if one
Yep.
judge comes in,
Lighting
they can
control
push the button, it'll go to whatever he programs, and the next judge comes in and pushes it.
You know, that would be definitely one of what we consider, Ray, and it's, depending on how sophisticated it needs to be, it wouldn't be that expensive. So I think we could definitely keep that in consideration. Unless we just want to go with toggle switches, which you know,
Probably not,
ultimately
no.
is super cheap, but doesn't always give you what you need.
So these last few sheets, there's a floor plan that shows the power, all the outlets, the different symbols. You don't have a key plan on here yet, do you?
No, not on this drawing, it's on the
They
front
can't-
drawing,
They can't
first
tell.
electrical.
Okay, it's up front.
Yeah.
First electrical sheet. So if folks want to come in and say, boy, what does my office look like? And here's the supervising desks. You got this thing that looks like the battle star or something.
Yeah,
Look at
right.
that, what the symbol is. And then there are the other systems. There is a floor plan that show the other systems too.
Fire alarm, voice and data, it'll show security, AV systems when we get to that in the courtrooms.
We'll go through with Barb on all of this for the IT, and make sure
Yeah.
we've got everything where she would like to see it as well.
Right.
That'll be a whole separate meeting.
Okay. Anything more?
No, well, the last page is just showing the electrical distribution, which is not really probably critical, but
One more.
all the way in from the utility, all to the different electrical panel boards that are around the building. One thing, Dave, I want to try to see today, if possible, is the jail and the emergency distribution over there. So when we tie in, we know exactly what we're tying into. If we have a chance to run over there after this meeting, maybe.
And there'll be a few more sheets added to this as we continue to go with details. Forming riser diagrams.
Yeah, we'll have controls and details and schedules for all the equipment.
Oh yeah, we'll double cover drawing probably eventually.
So, we'll come back in a couple months with a full bidding document is completed, we probably will work with this in most detail, and probably review sheets that's just new information.
Hopefully by that time, most people that care already know what's in there.
Got
because we
into
discussed it.
detail.
We will give you a couple weeks to look at it though, for comment.
Jake, you want to give a real quick update on the life cycle costs?
Yep, I have an initial model done of the life cycle costs, and I have a copy of the initial report here with me. It's not quite ready to submit to the DNR because I have to fine tune it still. But the system that we've chosen has the lowest energy performance, and overall that equates to the lowest life cycle cost of the three alternatives. We modeled a variable refrigerant system with geothermal, which is what our base design is. We modeled that variable refrigerant system without geothermal, with alternative fluid cooler and boiler. And then we modeled heat pumps with geothermal. And the variable refrigerant system was more efficient, although it had a higher first cost over the life cycle. It ended up having a payback over the other alternatives of around 6 years, I think, in the initial model. And part of that helping is the superior envelope that we have in the building, and we have the energy efficient lighting. All of those things equated to initially what looks like very low energy use. Again, I still have some system details to fill in the energy model and finalize it before we actually submit it to the DNR for their review. But initially, I think clearly we've chosen the systems that have the best life cycle cost. And we're going to be significantly outperforming code minimum.
What that means is lower energy costs down the road from this point forward, and you should see a lot less cost to operate your building than some of the other ones you've got around here.
Yep. Even though we're paying slightly more for this system up front, it doesn't take very long to pay back and equate to less expenses in the long run. And that report does include descriptions of all the systems that were modeled, energy rates, a lot of technical data that we don't need to delve into, but it really goes over in detail. I mean, monthly breakdowns of expected energy usage and comparison between those systems.
Once it gets submitted and we get the approval back from the DNR, you guys will get a copy of that.
So the 6-year payback, what does that really mean? It's a payback as compared to
The other
baseline
system
energy
choices. So we compared those three compared to baseline code systems, it's probably faster than that. Because we're significantly more energy efficient than code base. But we picked three rather efficient systems and compared them. And so comparing the VRF system with the geothermal, which had an initial cost of, I'm going to say $900,000, just I don't off the top of my head. And then we go down to the next system down that had no geothermal, but it had a boiler and a fluid cooler, and say that was at $800,000. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head. So you pay more initially for that system. You pay, say, $100,000 more. But in 6.5 years, you've saved that much in energy costs that now you're actually saving money every month on your utility bills over what you would have paid for the cheaper system. And then it also takes into account replacement costs, maintenance costs of the different systems, and it applies those over a 25-year period. So it looks at it and says, over 25 years, which one is the most cost-effective? How many total dollars does the system cost you in energy, maintenance, replacement of equipment over that 25-year period? And which one adds up to the lowest sum of money over that 25-year period? And it turns out it only takes 6 years, 7 years to reach that point where it's clear which system is best. It doesn't even take 25 years. So it's a really good building going together. It's going to be very energy efficient, low cost to operate.
Any strategies that you saw as you developed that you might want to implement?
There are some baseline strategies that we've found in the past that are implemented as cost-effective strategies. For example, right now we're planning on including CO2 control. So it'll monitor the CO2 levels in the large volume spaces such as the courtrooms. And so if no one's in there and the air quality is good, it's not going to ventilate that space anymore. So you're not wasting energy conditioning outdoor air for an empty room. But when the space is full and there's 50 people in there and everyone's breathing and it starts to get a lot more CO2 in the air, that system will say, hey, your CO2 level is up, and it'll automatically adjust how much that space is being ventilated. So it'll only ventilate as needed.
Kind of like this room.
Yeah, right now we could use a little bit of fresh air in here, but most of the time it doesn't matter. And so the system is designed so the controls will automatically optimize some of those things.
And is there
Save
a way
energy.
to tell it that, we know we got 50 people coming for, a trial, we can set it so it's gonna be cool before they get there? or-
The space will remain comfortable during occupied times all the time. It'll remain within whatever set points you set it at. And it'll automatically adjust based on that return air temperature. So it'll automatically adjust and maintain comfortable level. It'll also monitor that CO2, not for temperature, but just for, just general air quality. And it'll automatically adjust that as it goes too. And it's compared to a lot of older systems where you had to do a building warm up, get the boiler running, get the space comfortable. I remember our church, you had to set it like 2 hours in advance just to get it ready for when the congregation would show up. This is a much faster response time on these systems, so it's not an issue. The system will automatically adjust.
Unless there's any more questions on the drawings or that, next thing we wanted to talk about was where the cost estimate is at. Don's been working with our cost estimating consultant in quite a bit of detail, and we had long phone conversations with them, so we're going to let him take you through this. You see that big bold number at the bottom, that's good news compared to where we were at before, so kind of set the mood with that.
What is that big bold number at the bottom?
It's $6,381,522.
Last time we were at 6.583, so we came down a couple $100,000. Part of what we said we would do last time is we looked at some different options or alternates. We said we'd look at the outside wall and maybe look at precast if it could save us a significant amount of money, and it did. We looked at SIPS panels on the roof. SIPS panels are a structurally insulated panel. You get a lot higher R value, which also allows us to space the steel out a little bit farther because they have better spanning capabilities than a traditional metal deck. And because of the things that we have to do inside and also the acoustics, we were spraying the bottom of it to get that extra R value. Well, we didn't have to do that, so we saved all that money because the R value was built into the SIPS panels, which then also, because we're putting the shingles on top, we could eliminate the sheeting because these panels already come with the sheeting. And so we were able, just by making a couple select changes, reduce a lot of that cost, and it's also going to be easier for the contractor to install it. We typically wouldn't go to SIPS panels because of the high R value, because a lot of people don't want that high R value. So the traditional metal deck and insulation works well for that. So that was a couple of savings you're going to see in here.
It's also quieter.
It's also quieter. As long as Dave's not walking on the roof. We went through and there's going to be subtle modifications all the way through. So if you compare it to the last one, as our cost estimator does a review of our drawings, he does another takeoff each time. So as we've tweaked some walls and some spaces maybe are an extra 5 or 10 square feet bigger or smaller, the way we turn a wall or change a door, it all changes the square footage for him. So he goes through that whole calculation again, and he'll do it again at the end of our construction document phase. And what that does is it sets the square foot numbers, and we are constantly monitoring what those products cost out on the market. So he's got those current dollar information amounts. So you'll see that you've got quantities and then you've got unit cost. That's how we come up with what those individual items should be costing, not just for materials, but installed costs. So as you're looking at the overall totals, you're looking at pretty much what that element costs the project. Okay, so if we change something, for instance, if we have terrazzo flooring, if we were to back that out and go to, say, a ceramic tile instead, then we might save $2 a square foot. Well, that $2 a square foot for 10,000 square feet, as you can see, would be like $20,000. But there are some things that you would lose because of it. So it all gets balanced out as we do the full cost estimate. And then there are other things that we've added as we get more detailed. Ray has given us a lot more detail on the courtroom, so we've been able to really fine tune those numbers. So some of those costs went up a little bit for the courtroom because we knew we were gonna be doing that. Like acoustical panels, we'll start looking at that baseline acoustical panel he's got in there. And we may look at a different products, very similar, but a different manufacturer. That might bring that cost down a little bit. Same end result. So at this point, as we talked about the specs in the beginning, we start identifying those individual products that then feed back into our decals. So we're gonna keep doing the adjustment of costs. The site costs have pretty much stayed the same. And as you're going through, it's the same divisions that we had on the outline spec. That just helps keep everything coordinated and organized for you guys. The one thing that I think I mentioned, the excavated materials from all that limestone that's in the ground, that rock, that has to come out, so those prices went up. But as you get into our concrete costs, our masonry costs, those went down. The precast, we added a separate category for the precast, and that, like I said, was actually cheaper than the masonry walls we had, because it's a lot less labor, for one thing, and it goes up quicker with precast panels being set in place than it does to lay each brick. So that just kind of goes without saying that the labor is a lot less on that. We're starting to identify a lot of little things as far as reinforcing steel and fasteners and things like that. One item that we will get into in one of our next meetings will be hardware. Right now, we have an allowance in for hardware. We've got a pretty good idea of what we're gonna be doing here, and we know it's gonna be in this range. But as we start fine tuning, we've got some special security locks. We wanna make sure we pick the one that is best suited for what we're trying to do in those back corridors. And that'll balance out some of the other areas like storerooms and offices. And we'll get the right finish after talking with you guys. So that'll all get drilled down into the cost estimate on the main floor. Anything that you guys want to talk about in particular on the costs? If you have
I
any
guess the
questions.
only thing that I would mention is if, on demolition, if it's possible that secondary roads, because we do have dump trucks and that type of thing, if we can utilize some of that, that could be a possible savings in there. But, depending on the time of the year and that too.
Well, I've actually talked with our cost estimator about just that. He had plugged in, new gravel coming in for a lot of different things. We looked at the amount of cubic yards of concrete rubble that could be then crushed into gravel, the class 5 gravel. And so we're actually utilizing a lot of that on site. We don't think we're gonna have any extra. Depends on if we take a lot more of the brick and put it back in the hole. But if we do, then we can certainly look at maybe the other places for stockpiling. If you guys have like a maintenance yard that we could store it out there, that would be perfect. But if we don't have to move it from the site, it saves all that trucking costs and it saves the diesel and everything that goes with it.
So you're thinking of using a large amount of the masonry or concrete?
Any concrete footings, foundations, the old limestone, all that can get crushed up and made and turned into gravel. What they do is they do a clean sift, and that takes out all the debris. They use magnets, they get all the steel and fasteners and all that other stuff out. It works pretty well. We do it on a lot of demolition projects. We saved quite a bit by being able to recycle the materials without having to go get new.
Okay. So then when it comes time for the demolition, what if there's parts that folks want? Say, for instance, the cupola, or whatever else it is there.
Well, last time I was
Do you
up there.
identify those
Yeah.
and have that individual or that firm take it out? I mean,
There's two ways to do it. One is we can do those things in advance. And if they don't get done in advance, we can build them into the contract, to have the contractor help with that and put a unit price in so that the demolition contractors, when they submit their bids, will have to provide a price to, salvage the cupola, for example, and set it aside, or take the brick and chip and clean and put it on pallets, or any wood framing, for example, to remove it and
Don't you want somebody that actually wants that stuff?
Yeah, and
First off.
you can get bids from people to
Okay.
give you the unit price so you can calculate the balance. For example, we're doing a deconstruction on an old school in Anamosa right now, and we got pricing for a brick of a certain, and we'll give you 35 cents a brick if you provide it chipped and on pallets. So then when we have the demolition contractors bid it, they give us their cost to chip and palletize it, so we can see, does the math work or not?
It may not,
And if it
may
doesn't,
cost you more.
if it doesn't work, then you know you want to grind it up and use it for fill.
The other
But
thing,
Any other material can work, that's it.
the other thing that we've done, and I've done this on a number of demolition projects, where we can go through the building and identify things that might be of value and contact local people if they want them. If you have people that you know already want something, we'll walk them through, we'll settle on a price with them, and then they come get it. And it's gone before the contractor gets here, and we tell them on the drawings, this isn't here anymore. Or if it's like the condensing units, those are fairly new. Dave and I looked at them last time when we were up here. If we don't have somebody that buys them ahead of time, but you think you can, we'll have we'll put it the spec that says, contractor, take these and turn them over to the owner. And then they'll put them wherever you want. If you want to put them in a warehouse somewhere, if you want to sit them over at the jail, whatever, and then have somebody come and buy them later. I mean, there are a couple of ways we can do it, but if we can sell it ahead of time, get it out of here, that's best. Contractor doesn't even know about it, doesn't touch it, doesn't charge you anything.
I just have a practical question here. Let's say somebody wants that cube.
Huh?
How do you do something like that? You get a crane in?
Here's how we handle that. And I'll give you, first
I
I'll
mean,
give
I'm
you,
just,
first I'll give you a story.
okay,
Over in Illinois, western Illinois, we were bringing down a couple of large buildings, and they had a walkway bridge, steel bridge that went across the ravine. I sold the bridge 3 times. Nobody could figure out how to get it out of there. And we gave them some ideas, but it's not something you want to get involved with, because if you tell them to do it this way and it doesn't work, you don't want them to come back on you. So it's kind of a cash and carry deal. And, you know, if they want to buy a bridge, they better know how to get the bridge out of there. If they want to get the condensing units, if they want to go get the lift and they can figure it out, we won't let them do something stupid. I mean, if they want to set ladders on the back to pick up and, you know, we're not going to let them do that. They have to sign usually insurance waivers that we'll put in a form and say, you're on your own to do this.
Do
Or
we-
they may hire a contractor.
Do we have to bid some of these items, or do we just?
it's not real estate, so you don't have to bid it.
Okay. So it's
So you
just.
may have multiple offers.
We can help you with
But
that.
but now to the next question, and I'm just asking,
Mhm. How would you get the cupola?
how would you get it? I mean, crane?
There are 2 ways you could do it. One, you could just simply disconnect everything, lift it off, and set it down on somebody's truck.
Okay.
Or they could dismantle it pieces at a time.
Okay.
It depends on if they're good at putting it back together.
Okay.
So
I just didn't know how you'd even do something.
there are some things that really don't matter how they take it apart. For instance, the building is gonna come down, so if they wanna bust a wall out to get a cabinet or something, and move it out easily, we probably don't care. But we don't want them to damage other things on the property, like knocking down trees and stuff, because they wanna get a crane in. So we wouldn't let them do that.
I'm anticipating this coming, and I just wanted to know what your thoughts were.
If you know somebody that wants some of the stuff right now, you give them my name, or I'll call them and give them their name, and we'll set up a time, we'll come up here, we'll meet with them, we'll make a deal with them, and you guys give them money. That's kind of how that works. We've done this before,
I bet.
yeah.
We're doing it on several projects right now.
Or would we be better off to advertise a lot of this stuff?
What we were doing on the school that we talked about, there was a lot of interest. So what we did was we provided a set period for people to provide basically silent bids. Here's a form, you identify the thing you want and the price you're willing to pay. And we maybe had 20 people that gave a price on the same item, and whoever offered the most money in a reasonable way to get it, gets the item. And then once that period is over, we just sell stuff to people if they provide a reasonable price. Then the selling is just,
We've also done it first come, first served.
yeah.
You know, if you show up and you want something, you want cash, sure.
Well, outside of the air conditioners, probably the one thing that we'd want to still save is some of those vault doors. I mean,
And we
just
are
because-
integrating those into
You
the
already
design
got
of the
That's what I say,
building.
because, yeah, we'd want to, but outside of that, I don't see where we would want to make sure.
We can show you the plan or something if you want.
Recorder has one, auditor has one.
They're basically built into the wall,
Is that a-
inside their space.
No,
It's not-
I mean, very little scrap value or
Also,
something.
they can't be used.
No, it was outdated,
This other loose sheet that I handed out, this is,
yeah.
this was the format that we were using early on for our own cost estimating. If you look at just that bottom third section, that was the soft costs. Those soft costs mostly are not included in this cost estimate, this is construction. And we're trying to track those soft costs too, so that there aren't any surprises. So there are these other things like the asbestos abatement, for example, that's being conducted at $78,000.
Geotech, that was a cost we
Yeah.
took care of up front.
The site survey, and some of these other components. Some of these are just allowances right now. The ones that are in bold are kind of fixed numbers.
So you're saying this number here is not in this number here?
Correct.
Okay, so we gotta add the $767,514 to the $6,381,522, so it puts us right at a little over $7 million.
That's right. So that everything's captured here. And these other owner expenses are not,
Yeah,
they're
we-
not in this 6,381.
One of the things that we did with some of the furniture and things like that, we broke them out as separate items. I know Scott had a conversation early on about maybe some potential revenue coming from their side to buy furniture. And so we talked about this a little bit. We're breaking those out in the front, we're calling it furniture, fixtures and equipment. Because that way the contractor doesn't have to actually buy some of that stuff. Okay. Now, some things that have to get built in, like projection screens and stuff, he does that. But chairs and tables and things like that, and desks and, you know, the cubicles, he shouldn't have to deal with that. So those are all FF&E things.
Okay, so that's where it's at right now.
You know, the one thing I should point out, and maybe Kevin, you already did this on the soft costs, some of those you might have coming from other areas of the budget. Legal fees, we had that part on there in case there was anything that needed to be covered. If
We
you
don't know if there will be any.
we had a budget item for legal fees. If you don't have any legal costs, then you don't spend that money. And maybe that comes from some other category of your budget. So you'll have to take a look at those and see how it fits in with the way you do things.
And the geothermal test well, I don't know if we're gonna do one of those, that's
I
something.
think it'd be a good idea, and I can put some wording together to get that, get a couple prices on that, get somebody going on it now that we know we're going that direction.
I talked to him 4 or 5 times.
What'd it say?
He said, I'll get it to you. And when I called him up 2 weeks later, he said, well, I can't find it. And then it was, well, we don't have it. And then it was, you'll have to call this guy. And I called that guy, he didn't have it. It didn't exist in his mind.
Well, I
So,
got to think, the soil could be a little bit different from there to there.
Mhm.
So you're better off drilling your own well, so you got your own,
Yeah,
this is what the,
we can
So we'd
clearly
be a lot more
agree.
confident in our final field sizing
Yeah.
if we were able to do a test bore. And the test bore will be able to, we'll locate it so that it's part of the field. And so even though you pay for that test bore now, it's one less bore that you pay for later.
Right, so.
So we'll integrate
I'd
that
probably
into the
double
design.
number here, there's $9,000 looking for geothermal, it says horizontal test well, but it'd be a vertical test well. And that's $9,000, or at least $8,000 that you want to spend later.
Jake, how soon can we get that going, do you think?
I can type up something and get it to you this week.
All right, so,
Start getting
if-
pricing, give
we
it a
should
couple
ask you guys.
contractors to,
well, we should ask you guys, do you need to authorize that ahead of time to get that test well done, or can we just go ahead and do it?
put on the agenda and
Well, we can get quotes ahead
Yeah,
of time.
go ahead and get that.
Okay.
Get some
Get one
quotes,
call.
Okay.
but before you award it, obviously. we can go through the
Right.
process.
All right, so we'll get that for you.
We also put things in here like builder's risk insurance, the testing. utility rebates. If there's a landscaping plan, the SWIP, and NPD ask for this. So there are some things in here, and some of those numbers are variable, and they may affect some of these too. So we're gonna continue to look for efficiencies. So that's where we are at. What else we do there? Okay, happy with that. What, is there anything else that you have questions on that you want us to follow up with?
No, the only thing, we're still debating whether or not we want to do an election on the 5th of November, or if we want to set this for possible bond letting and then do a if they want a reverse referendum. That's the only question, and I want to talk to Mark a little here again before he takes too far off. No, I think we kind of know, like you say, now where we're at. This gives us a pretty good idea.
With these two numbers put together, would you build in a contingency?
Contingency is built in.
You already got contingencies built in the whole thing.
If you look at the first page at the bottom,
Yeah.
there's a design
Company
contingency.
design,
Mhm.
yeah, 425,000.
As we get farther into the details, that typically goes down all the way,
Right.
sometimes to zero.
Okay,
Because
so
we
then
gotta
if you
figure-
got that scenario, would you still build in? How many normal change orders in a project like this would you expect to see?
Industry standard is about 3% for change orders that are related to unknown things that come up, or errors and omissions. And we do see many times clients generate change orders because they change their mind, or a new law gets enacted, or whatever it may be.
Or they just see something they just can't stand?
Or they just wanna have, if they can't stand it, then we can reduce it.
Or as we've seen, we save you money on bid day, and you go, let's spend it, so there's a change order.
When
That
you say-
happens.
When you
That
say
does happen.
3%, does that mean 3% of the cost of the project, or is it 3% of the items?
It's the cost of the project.
It's a 3% of the
So-
construction cost. So if it bids, and it bids at $6.2 million, typical change order over the life of the project before construction is complete is about 3% of that 6.2. That's industry standard. I think FEH's is right around 1.25.
The tighter the documents we have for them, the less opportunity for changes.
Right. At the time when the bids are received, if we see a lot of numbers that are very close, that tells us that we can be comfortable in a 3 to 5% recommendation for contingency for you to hold on to. To say, you're gonna wanna have this much in reserve, because you may need to spend it. If we see numbers all over the place on bid day, that tells us that the contractors are unknown, there's different things going on, there's some subs and suppliers that are playing some games, and we usually make a recommendation, you might wanna have 5 to 7% of contingency in reserve. We don't usually make that decision until we see the bids. But typically, they come in pretty tight. Lately, we've seen them very tight, so.
I thought it was interesting the other day talking to Absolute Energy, when they built that plant, they never had one change order. That was the ethanol plant up by
That's great.
northern part of the county.
Many times with private projects, we don't see any change orders because we do a guaranteed maximum price. There is no such thing as a change order. Many of our projects have only one change order, and they're typically a change order for a credit. So it could be that, it comes in less than a bid when it's all said and done.
When you do a bid, do you specify how long they have to build it?
Yeah, we give them a construction deadline.
Okay.
A lot of times we'll say, we want it done by this date. If for some reason that we want to give them the option, we can say, if you have a different date you would like to have it done by, you tell us on the bid form. And there are times when somebody can mobilize their crews faster, and they'll put a shorter time period down. There may be one or two guys, they'll give you a lower price, but it's gonna take them a couple months longer. We'll evaluate those on bid day with you and say, well, here's a good value because of
Okay,
the
you
X,
can
Y, and Z.
compare it to the rent you're paying, for example, and say, okay, what's our cost of not being back in our own building? We can also put in liquidated damages to that effect as well, if they don't meet a deadline. We've done that quite often too. Especially for any kind of a building that has to be done at a specific time. If it's not done, it's gonna cost the owner money for one reason or another.
Such as a university project where you're building dorms and the kids have to move in on a certain day, if it's not done, you
They're
got,
gonna be paying hotel rooms.
Yeah,
you got all kinds of costs.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I did have another question here, but I'll think of it in a minute.
When we get closer to completing the documents, the front end of the specification, which really isn't identified here, is gonna include all those things. All those legal parameters, the bid forms, alternates, unit prices, liquidated damages. So we can build a lot of those safeguards in, and a lot of opportunities for efficiencies to allow contractors to make recommendations to save your money or change the timing.
I can walk you through all that front end information.
Okay, typically, how long would a building like this take to build, in your opinion?
Depending on when it starts construction, if they start construction on the schedule that we're
Spring.
talking about,
12, 14 months.
I would say 11 to 12, so about a year.
Even with the precast walls?
That accelerates it sometimes, but we do have a building to take down.
We have to plan in, get the site ready by getting the building out of the way. So that's gonna take you,
Could that be done in the winter?
it would be done anytime.
Because you're gonna pile stuff on site.
We're doing deconstruction projects right now.
Okay, now we're gonna pile everything on site, and I said, we don't have anything in here for landscaping, so what happens to our grass?
Well, for instance, if you're gonna pile things on site like crushed gravel, you put it on the parking lot, off to the side.
I think we do have,
Yeah, there's a little bit in here.
Well, it's
Soft
right down
cost.
soft cost, but,
in
yeah,
the
oh
soft
yeah,
cost,
that's our cost.
Yeah.
that's a
So-
landscaping fee. If you go to the extent of hiring somebody to develop a landscaping design, as opposed to
It's much more than-
grass and
Yeah.
sodding
That's
and a
about
few
3
trees, we can handle
It's-
that
it's
without a
in here,
landscape
so
architect.
sodding, 24,000, so.
All right. I don't think we're all this yet.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
lot
if you have
of
any questions, just give me a call, I'll walk you through.
And you're certainly gonna have questions, we
Oh, yeah.
understand that. There's a lot of stuff here.
There is. So you bring in a crusher?
Well, I also,
As a practical application, when you crush, how many days does that take?
we're doing 2 13-story buildings right now, and for each 13-story building, we brought them down by implosion. Takes 10 days to crush up the building.
Okay.
So in this case, you only have 3-story building, you're probably gonna take maybe 4 or 5 days.
Or two.
And we usually put measures in place so that, the neighbors are protected. We have a little meeting set up with the community people, adjacent property owners, police, fire chief, and we say, okay, here's what's gonna happen, here's when it's gonna happen, here's what you should expect. Quite honestly, when they're doing the crushing on site, it's less dust that's generated than driving down a gravel road. So the people across the street probably won't even see it, but they won't experience the dust. Yeah,
That's
we-
us, just.
I understand.
Go wash the windows.
It's only a week, it's, we live next to a quarry, so it's no big deal.
Probably less commotion of trucks running in and out hauling stuff.
A lot less commotion, yeah. The other part of stockpiling, when we take the building down, there's a big hole that we have to fill, not the basement part, but outside of that. Part of it can go back in at that point. I mean, we're planning on that right now. And then the top 5 feet get natural suitable fill, which is not the gravel necessarily, it's soils. Because we don't want to bring gravel right up to the top.
Okay. So, we'll be waiting for your nice basically your approval to allow us to approve the bid documents. And once we get that, then we'll proceed with those. And we've got a meeting to talk about the court side of things.
Want to put together the bid documents.
Probably about 8 to 10 weeks.
8 to 10 weeks.
We're still on schedule.
Yeah. September and October.
We,
We'll be done the first week in November.
well, we had targeted from our original schedule to get you a set of drawings to review right at Thanksgiving.
We wouldn't be done before Thanksgiving.
And then give you a couple of weeks to look at that. And
That had in mind that you take a couple of weeks to authorize us to proceed with construction documents.
And then if you wanted to do the demolition ahead of time, we would make a separate package to get that going, so that you don't have a contractor trying, waiting on our drawings, for instance, to get that going. So we can do it as a separate package and get it out. That does keep you from getting that grant money. What's that?
How much?
At most 50,000. But they won't make that determination and then get approval on any of that grant until mid-April. And I don't think you want to wait. Yeah.
And there's no guarantee that you can get it or get that, anywhere near that maximum amount.
So you can get that much in grant.
Oh, yeah.
Plus you have to do the gymnastics of the transfer of the building. So it's quite the effort.
I can go into more in depth on that. I had that conversation with the DNR, so if you want more comment.
They have a talk later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else? Or we can,
That's good. Leave those there, I'll be scooping through those.
okay. I figured you would be.
Yep. You need us?
No, I don't think so.
Only if you wanna listen.
Oh, well, I'm not in a hurry, I guess. Okay.
Oops, excuse me.